This episode is sponsored by Jacobson Real Estate Company. Are you ready to find your dream home? Or maybe you're thinking about selling and want the best deal possible? Well, look no further. At Jacobson Real Estate Company, we make buying or selling your home smooth, stress-free, and exciting. With 50 plus years of experience and a deep knowledge of the Winona, Minnesota area market, we specialize in turning your real estate goals into reality. Whether it's finding that perfect neighborhood, negotiating top dollar for your property, or answering all of your questions along the way, we're here for you. Plus, with our personalized approach, you're not just a client, you're family. So why wait? Let Jacobson Real Estate Company open the door to your future. Call us today at 507-313-2716 or visit our website at jacobsonrealestatecompany.com. Because your next chapter starts here. Buy, sell, invest. Jacobson Real Estate Company. Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Brews Cruise. I am your host, Chris Jacobson, and today we are joined by Rob Noerr. He is a populist conservative commentator, former congressional candidate, and he's a debater known for his take on both the left and the right in long-form political debates on his YouTube channel called Normal America. Rob's built a reputation as a sharp anti-establishment voice who isn't afraid to challenge mainstream narratives. In this episode, we're going to talk about his journey, where he started and where he is today. Whether you agree with Rob or not, one thing is true: he is never boring. Rob, welcome to the Brews Cruise Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for that polite introduction. Most of the time I'm debating lefties, and the introduction's nowhere near as polite, so I appreciate it.
Today I'm going to let you off the hook because I'm not going to debate you. I want to learn about who Rob is personally and all, where you came up from, where you're at now, and everything in between. So I guess the first thing I got to ask, because this it sounds like a lot of high blood pressure. How did you get into debating?
So I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and everyone I know was apolitical. My parents never voted, as far as I knew, their whole life. Graduated. I wanted to be a journalist, particularly sports journalist. So I went to a little university. It's about 20 minutes from where I live, called Clarion University, state school in Pennsylvania, pretty much the cheapest school you could go to in PA. I took a debate class my second semester, and you had an option at the end of the class. You could either do a final paper or you could travel to this debate that they had. And the form of debate was called policy debate. And so I elected to go to the debate, and it was in form of policy debate. There's 3 levels, normally novice, JV, and open. This was a rookie tournament. It's one-time only tournament, which are people that hadn't debated ever before, even earlier that year. And I ended up winning that tournament, and I just thought, I'm going to be the greatest debater in the world. And then the next semester, I joined the team, started to get into politics, and I promptly got smacked around in my first 7, 8 debate tournaments at a higher level. And it sort of got me hooked because I was very competitive. So long answer is that it went through debate. The short answer is I've always been sort of a competitive a-hole, and politics was a way to win a game for me. Then I started to get interested in debate and politics to try to get better to win this game. Debate was radically left-wing, most people. I ended up being sort of a Ron Paul fan. So I didn't like the war in Iraq way back in 2004, 2003 is when I started debating. So 2003, 2004. So the lefties kind of liked me because I was a weird righty, well, he doesn't like Bush. And that was it. That's where I got my start. I did 4 years of debate, got pretty good at it. And then I was a debate coach and judge for the following 6 years or so. And some years after that, I decided to run for Congress and started a YouTube channel.
Well, that's an awesome rundown. Now, you said the reason why you had to write a paper or had to go to debate. Was that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Now that kind of sounds like me. And the reason I say that is not because I like to debate, but because I had to take humanitarian class in college. I went to the University of Northern Iowa, and I looked on ratemyprofessor.com, and there was one that said, you had to give presentations in front of the class rather than take tests. And I go, that's my guy.
Sign me up.
I want that one. Yeah. I don't want to debate, but I can give a presentation in front of a class of 300 to 400. But boy, you sit me down and you ramble crap off to me all day long and I got to take a test after. It's not my guy. So I can kind of understand that. But debating for me in politics in general, that one would stress me out because I feel like, and this is just me in my mind because I'm not big into politics, but I feel like no matter what side you choose of whatever it is, about 50% of the people are going to hate you or disagree with you. Is that right or wrong?
That's certainly true. It definitely is. Now, it depends on what you're doing. Like, one of the things that's funny is I consider myself a right-winger, populist conservative. I'm Christian, so I'm coming at things from the right. I ran for Congress as a Republican, but I'm probably more of a contrarian than anything. I sort of like arguing. So when I debated in college debate, it's super left-wing, right? And everyone assumes when I debate online, it's super left-wing. Usually I'm debating left-wing people. But when I'm back home, everyone's a right-winger, right? And so I'll be somewhere, I'm out at the bar with friends or something, and they'll be like, oh, Trump's the best. He could do no wrong. And I'm like, no. Here's a bunch of things he does that I don't like. So it's weird because around here, it's like most of the time when I'm arguing politics with my friends, I sound sort of like a centrist or a lefty because I'm like, well, I'm not totally all in. I have a lot of complaints with the Republican Party, with things that, the Trump administration first and second have done. So I am right-wing, don't get me wrong, but yes, it's certainly true. It seems increasingly like, I'm biased because I am a right-winger. I think it's worse on the left, but I think you're absolutely right. It seems like the easiest thing to do is stay in a lane. And so it's almost like, I liken it to sports. Like, I'm from the Pittsburgh area, so we're Steelers fans. And I have friends from Cleveland that are Cleveland fans. And that's it. You got to pick one or the other, and then you hate the other, right? That's just the way it goes. Yep. So there's definitely a lot of that.
Well, and I totally understand that because, a lot of people I talk to, most people are almost not right. They're not left. They're kind of right down the middle because I have some friends who they're Republicans, but they, like you just said, there's things that Trump does they absolutely hate. But then there's the left side. And then, there's people out here protesting left and right about certain things. So I just find it so interesting that you would want to get into that type of debate because I was telling Curtis, who's actually the one that got us together tonight, I was like, you debate sports, there's really not that big of hard feelings afterwards, but sometimes you get into politics and there's some hard feelings when you're done debating or arguing, however you look at it.
Yeah, it's, get with Curtis, watch my show. We'll make you a right winger. You'll learn to dislike the left more, but no, not to get too much into it. It's certainly true. And I think that, not to get too in the dumps here, but we just saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk basically represented the idea of going onto college campuses and debating. And it seemed like for a while now, and again, I'm biased. I think the problem's worse on the left, but in general, you could just say, not to make it partisan, it does seem like we're moving away from people that just had disagreements to people that think you're evil for disagreements. For me, I happen to have the luxury of having these two worlds that I lived in. This left-wing sort of, when I was debating at the highest levels in college, people were wealthy. They tend to be from the city. You're debating people that probably went to a private school throughout their high school years and then got sort of recruited to like a Harvard or Yale. The style debate I did didn't have divisions. So, I liken it to college football. My university, Clarion University, was like Division III or whatever you call it. They weren't playing Ohio State. They're not playing Alabama, right? They got their own division. Yep. Debate wasn't like that. You're debating, there's just one division, and you're debating the Naval Academy, the Military Academy, and then the next round you're debating Harvard, and then you might debate Northwestern the next round, and then you're debating some school you've never heard of from Wyoming. It's just the way it went. Those people at the top levels were usually very well-to-do in their upbringing and were from the city. Back home, everyone I know is basically working poor, and I'm from rural America. And so I had to check my biases a lot because when I started to get pretty good at debate, I sort of had this chip on my shoulder. It was like, to heck with these city people, to heck with these wealthy people. They don't know what my way of life's like. And there's a lot of that for sure, but I also made a lot of friends. And those friends might still disagree with me politically, but we don't hate each other. It's not something that we find that we're evil. We're just like, we both want what's best for the country or with our community, and we just have disagreements how to get there. Increasingly, though, it does seem And again, I have to say it or my audience will flip out. I definitely think this problem's worse with the left. I could get into the details if you want as to why, but it certainly seems that there is increased temperature where it's like, well, if you disagree with us, you're, you're from a very bad political ideology like those guys in Germany in World War II. And it's like, that's just not the case. And it's dangerous to think that way for so many people that think that's what politics is now. But, it's weird because my getting into politics, like I said, was more of the game of it. And people ask me what was the first debates I had. Sports debates, baby, all through high school. Like, you'd sit there and argue, what pitcher should start, the first game of the playoffs. And, should we draft a quarterback? That's when I was 15, 16, that's what I was talking about. So many people look at debate as or argue it as a bad word. That's what me and my friends did for fun. Right? Like we would argue about sports or we would argue about our favorite bands. And that was fine. That was like a competitive way. It was the same as playing a board game to me. So I just sort of took that. And because of what I got into, politics was part and parcel to the game of debate. And it stuck with me and I got an interest in it and saw how that could affect my community. But yeah, if it wasn't for the competitive nature of it, and I certainly in the game of debate, you're not looking at, when you're arguing with your friend who's the best, who should the Heisman winner be, you don't think your friend's evil. You don't think they're terrible. You're just like, you're an idiot. You're wrong. That's how I approach debate, where it's like, I tried to go with it with the mindset that it's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean your opponent's a terrible person necessarily.
Right. And I totally agree with that too, because when you get down to the base of it, a lot of people actually, if you sat down with them and weren't debating about something, you probably have a lot more in common than you think with someone else. So that leads me to my next question is, you decided to run for Congress then in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
What was that like? And what did you run for specific?
So I was running for District 12, U.S. Federal Congress. So it wasn't the state level, it was the federal level. I'd been involved in politics locally in my little county. I'll try to make it brief. Basically, it's frowned upon to try to primary an incumbent within your own party. So if you work with the Republicans or the Democrats in your district and you say, hey, I'm going to challenge the guy that's currently in office, they'll be like, no, that's bad. You're seen as the enemy then. So that was made clear to me. So a special election opened up where a man by the name of Tom Marino had won his election, and then he got a serious illness. And so after he won, he had to basically drop out. And so they had to redo the election. So in this case, there was no primary. It was what was called a conferee process. And that process was a normal primary. In Pennsylvania, it's a closed primary. So if you're Republican, you get to vote in the primary if you're in the district. This wasn't that. It was only 212 people got to cast a vote. Each county picked conferees, which were the 212, and then whoever got 50% or more of those conferees would eventually become the representative for the Republican. And the district that I was running in, District 12, was like 80% Republican, so whoever won the primary was going to win. It was interesting. On one hand, I learned a lot about the political process, which I'll talk about here in a second. A lot of it very good, and a lot of it very bad. There was a lot of weird corruption stuff going on, such as the frontrunner had to drop out because of allegations of abuse to his former wife that sprung up on the eve of the vote. And there was a lot of sort of nepotism where people picking favorites and not allowing me to come to events because I was a relative unknown. But there was a lot of good. I met one of my dear friends, Carlos, who was a political consultant, used to do a radio show with him in Pennsylvania. I met him through that process, got to meet a lot of politicians. And I still, to this day, go to 3 or 4 Republican events, probably a year, where I'm hanging out with, U.S. House representatives, president of the NRA, Senate candidates, governor candidates, etc. So I met all those people through that process of running. I took 10th place out of 24, got to give a speech at the event, and it was a learning process. One thing, if you're wondering about getting involved in politics at any level, here's my advice to you. I thought that I was going to be impressed. I sort of looked at it like, if you were walking into a room of brain surgeons, like if your girlfriend or wife or whatever is like, look, here's the deal. We're going to dinner with my friend and her husband's a brain surgeon. And it's going to be a room full of brain surgeons. You'd be like, I'm going to feel like an idiot. And then you get there and they're like shotgun and beers and it's like fart jokes. And you're like, oh, okay, this isn't that bad, right? That's sort of what it was to me. I thought it would be intimidating that I would get in this room with all of these other candidates that were already politicians at the state level and that they would sort of blow my doors off. And it wasn't that. Most of them knew less than me about the Constitution, about the role of a federal congressman. Most of you out there that are considering getting involved in politics, it's not that you're incapable of governing. Your weak suit is getting elected. You probably don't know the right people. You probably don't have a ton of money. You probably don't have a ton of donors. That's your weak suit. But never mistake that for meaning that you wouldn't be a good congressman, or you wouldn't be good on the school board, or you wouldn't be a good alderman. You probably would be. The fact that you care enough to want to get involved is already 80% of the game. So my advice is, if you feel like running, do it. You should try. It's getting elected is the hard part. Caring about your constituents, I think that that's something that we need more of, and particularly in national level politics. So I think that most of you would be qualified if you legitimately care.
Well, I think that's so much true what you just said, because I'm a wrestling fan, and Kane is the mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee. Yeah. And nobody probably would have thought a guy that's in, professional wrestling, he's a political figure. But like you said, to care is a big part of it already. And then getting elected is the hardest part, honestly, because most people probably, if you're running for it, you probably already care about what you're going to run for anyways. So that's,
and it just
that's
goes
very
to, I mean, it goes to show with Kane. I mean, you could burn your family alive in their funeral home and still go on to be mayor someday. I myself was a big Attitude Era wrestling fan, so yes. Glenn Jacobs is his name. He's mayor of Knoxville.
Glenn Jacobs. Yep. Well, I'm going to ask you a question before the end of this. We'll have a small debate between you and me on our Mount Rushmore of wrestling. But let's get into back to where we're at then. So then now at the beginning I introduced you and I said that you're a populist conservative and an anti-establishment. What does that mean for everyone else? Like, what do those terms mean?
So for me, I consider myself three things primarily, though they're in fluctuation. One would be that I consider myself a populist. Second would be that I consider myself libertarian adjacent. And third would be that I consider myself a Christian conservative. I think that third is replacing number two. When I say Christian conservative, I am now a Catholic, but I've only been so for about a month. I was always sort of non-denominationally Christian, which obviously influences your culture. And I think because of that, if you're serious about your religion, whatever your religious beliefs are, and even if you're not religious, if you have philosophical beliefs, probably that affects everything you do in life. That would be true of your politics. So that certainly has an influence. Libertarian adjacent, what I mean by that is I prioritize liberty and small government. Those two positions are many times antithetical, right? For example, a Christian conservative might say things like, you know what, I don't want people using hypodermic needles on the street. A libertarian adjacent person might say, well, we should decriminalize and have small government. And if people want to make bad choices with what to do with their own body, they should have the freedom to do it. So those two positions are clashing. But the position that I have the most is being anti-corruption populist. When I say populist, there's a lot of ways to define it. What I mean is this. I feel that there are institutions that run our country, and in fact, the world. Those would be political institutions, and this could be as simple as the president and the executive branches, so like the FBI, IRS, etc. It could be also things like Congress. It could be the courts, but it's also other cultural institutions, such as our mainstream media, academia, the entertainment industry, etc. I believe there are all these powerful institutions, and they don't really care about me or you. They don't care what the average person, be they left or right, really thinks. When they say democracy, they don't mean our voices, they mean their voices. There's all these different groups and they have different opinions. And so how do they maintain power and get the opinions that they collectively had pushed forth? And I think until that corruption ends, then disagreements that me and an average person may have on political things, such as should we have Medicare for all? Should we have stronger borders? Should we revamp the education system? All of that's sort of irrelevant if our voice doesn't matter. So for me, ending that institutional corruption is a precursor to sort of these political discussions that we would have in a more base level. That allows me to sort of reach across the aisle on many issues and say that, look, there might be someone out there that's antithetical to me in the sense that they're a socialist. I despise socialism. However, if that socialist says we're trying to weed out institutional corruption, that would be someone I could work with in the short term in order to try to crack into that corruption. Then we could have our discussions about, once we have a voice, why socialism's stupid and we should all be capitalists. But yeah, that's sort of what I mean by populist, fighting corruption that I see that's endemic within our institutions.
Is there one specific corruption that you think? Is there one that really hits you harder than others that you think is corruption?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue that I focus on the most is corruption surrounding the attacks on Donald Trump. Now, it's not that it's unique per se, it's that it's how evident it is. For me, the reason I supported Donald Trump in 2016 was I thought he could potentially accomplish two things. One was out the corruption, and second was do something about it. I don't think he did anything about it. I think he failed on that end. But he did out the corruption, and I don't think it's because he played 4D chess. I think it's because the institutions couldn't help but see someone that was a potential outsider. And if you think about it, regardless of what you think about Trump, it was sort of how it had to be if you're going to have a potential outsider. It has to be someone that's independently powerful and wealthy. Because in order to work your way through in the system to get sort of the amount of money and sort of attention that you would need to win the presidency, you're going to have to work within those systems, which they're not going to be willing to work with you if you're going to be a serious challenge to them. Trump, because the fact he was a billionaire, like him or hate him, is able to exist sort of tangential to that or outside of that system. And so I think what happened was, even if Trump could be someone who you think is corrupt, who you think is someone that's like of poor, low moral character, he's not controlled, or at least it doesn't seem as if he's controlled by these institutions that already existed. And it's evident when you hear about things like his first impeachment for this call on Ukraine, where you hear the State Department officials. State Department's supposed to work under the president. He is the elected president. He sets the foreign policy. And then the officials underneath him are supposed to carry out his vision. Instead, they kept saying, Trump went against our foreign policy. And that's a big cue that they exist outside. We don't get to vote for them. You didn't vote for anyone at the State Department. You didn't vote for anyone at the IRS. But they're the ones that really run things. And they don't like you voting for someone that's going to potentially challenge them. Chuck Schumer, for example, said before Trump was sworn in, Trump shouldn't criticize the FBI because they'd find 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at him, which in my opinion, they did. So that level of corruption that actually, it sounds benign, but it's unelected bureaucrats in these executive agencies and many other cultural institutions that really run the show. And we don't have a voice on them. And Trump's election just put that to the forefront. And in many ways, again, not to get too political here, but the presidency of Joe Biden did as well, because it was evident to me and anyone who was really paying attention to politics that at least for a couple years, if not longer, that Joe Biden wasn't cognitively there. So who was running the show? And the truth is, it's unelected people. That's who's running the show. And when they decide that you're going to do something, even if it's unpopular, then you'll do it. And so we could see a litany of policies, such as the border policy, that's basically an 80-20 issue, issues with biological males in female spaces. Those are 80-20 issues, regardless of what you think about them. But it didn't matter. It's not like there was a Democratic vote where we got to say, like, yeah, actually, 80% of people are against that stuff, so let's do it. And this goes back through, I guess if the question is like, what was the first sort of issue that I really saw is like a conspiracy or corrupt? For me, the big one's Waco. Believe it or not, what happened to the Branch Davidians. I remember I watched this documentary on it, and the thing that blew my mind, I never heard anyone else except me talk about. For those who don't know, Waco was the case we're talking about. David Koresh was the leader of this cult called the Branch Davidians. I'm not going to get in much to what they believe, but they basically believed that it was prophesized they would have this standoff against like worldly powers. Well, the prophecy came true because there was a standoff with the ATF, which they won. Then the FBI came in and laid siege to the place for some 40 days. It resulted in a fire that burned alive many people in this compound with few survivors. The autopsy revealed, and this is, if there's any kids watching, take a moment to leave. I'm not going to swear anything, but it's tough. The autopsy revealed that there were children that were hiding in the pantry, and they didn't die from smoke inhalation or the fire. They died because the amount of tear gas that were placed into the home was enough to basically act as strychnine, and it convulsed their muscles to break all of these bones. And what they said was probably one of the most painful ways that a human being could die. And these are children as young as 7, 8 years old that died in this way. And so when the FBI was asked about it, their spokesman said, we thought that if we caused their children pain, that they would leave they would come out. And that to me radicalized me, because the entire argument was that these Branch Davidians were these insane apocalyptic cult. So why would you think by torturing their children that they would come to their senses? And to see that occur and nothing was done, I started to look into more things like Ruby Ridge. And then I started to ask questions about other events that we were told, Gulf of Tonkin getting us in to Vietnam. And for me, it seemed like one big string of corruptions. And then it wasn't long after that, we had the 2008 financial crisis. where, Obama was elected to be this guy that was going to come in and he was going to like sort of speak for the people and go after these corrupt banks. And it was evident that these banks were corrupt. And he gave this famous speech when he got elected where he told the banks, "I'm the last thing standing between you and the pitchforks." And no one was seriously held to criminal account for the abuses that occurred in 2008. So for me, those sort of events sort of perpetually snowballed into me going like, oh, okay, this whole system's corrupt. It's all a big club and I ain't in it, in the words of George Carlin. And that was it. That's sort of where I got my start into being like, I think this is a corrupt mess. And I listened to people like Ron Paul, which was my first politician that I really supported. And he too talked about the massive size of corruption in our government, interventionism that ends up in a disaster, things like the Iraq War, Afghanistan, I would put in that category, Libya, Syria. So yeah, that's it.
That's, that is something I've never heard anybody actually say. They talk about Waco. I've never heard that one before. That one must, go under the rug. Nobody really thinks about that because
the part that people know about Waco is the tear gas is flammable. So who started the fire? The official narrative is the Branch Davidians did, but there's a lot of evidence from infrared cameras, etc., that flew overhead that it looks like after the tear gas was deployed that the FBI deployed firearms, which could light the flammable gas. So no one quite knows, but it's shady, man. If you look into it, it's depressing because regardless of what you think, children died. Even if you're like, well, David Koresh, he's a psychopath, and the people that are following him, they're psychopaths. Who cares? I still don't cheer for anyone to die. But with that children, that really for me resonated with me. I was like, how could this be in our country? It turns out there's a lot of crazy incidents like that. But yeah.
So I got a question for you. Is there anyone on the left that the people or policies that you agree with? I'm assuming there's probably some. Is there one that stands out in particular that you agree with on the left side?
Well, sure. So when it comes to politicians, there's an awful lot that left the Democratic Party. So you'd have people like Tulsi Gabbard that left the Democratic Party. I was always a big fan of Dennis Kucinich back in the day, even though there's a lot of economic policies I disagreed with. He was quirky and funny. He's like a polite Alex Jones. Like his big issue was aliens. Dennis Kucinich, which I thought was kind of funny. I respected a lot of what made Bernie Sanders popular. I did not like Bernie Sanders, but the idea of left-wing populism I respected because I feel that the left, particularly a lot of people that are progressives, and again, I can't stress this enough, I massively disagree with the policies that they want to implement, but they continue to vote for a party that's just basically a corporatist sort of centrist party. And so if you're someone that wants policies like Medicare for all, etc., you ain't going to get that with the Democrats, right? They're going to be centrist corporatist. They're going to be very similar to the centrist corporatist sort of Republican Party that's outside of Trump. So I respected anyone that went sort of outside of that. And now I think Bernie's since become very poor. However, there are people that consider themselves Democrat that I respect a lot. Jimmy Dore was a person that despised Donald Trump, but came out thinking that a lot of stuff that happened during the pandemic was tyrannical. Glenn Greenwald was another person that I respect a lot. Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger. These were all people that were lifelong lefties. Another person that I really likes, Jonathan Haidt. It started an academy called Heterodux Academy, seeking to understand why universities are becoming more radically left-wing. He himself is a left-winger. So there's certainly a lot of people that I respect in the media or sort of influencer landscape that are on the left. As far as the people that I interact with that are debaters, there are people that I like more than others, but a lot of the big name debaters that I interact with, I really, really don't care for as people for a lot of reasons. But I don't know how much of that is just because they're left-wingers. Another thing that you'll see when you get into, forget about politics, when you get into the streaming space, it's, and you know this, as a streamer, it's like, what makes you a successful streamer? Is it that you have to be a scumbag and those characteristics make you likely to be successful? Or is it once you achieve the success, you become a scumbag? Because there's an awful lot of big streamers with some skeletons in their closet. And I've interacted with some left-wingers in that space, and to an extent, some right-wingers that are bigger. But yeah. So, yeah, in a nutshell, those are the people I respect. Now, there are individual things, policies that I could respect from the left. One issue I think that separates me from a lot of right-wingers is, although I am I think that we have both an over-incarceration and under-incarceration problem in this country. I think that on one hand, people that are violent criminals should be given lengthier jail sentences and kept out of society. And I could back that up if you'd like. But I also think that some of the conditions of our jails are deplorable. I'm all for jokes. Like some of my favorite comedians are some of the most vile comedians you'll ever heard of, like Doug Stanhope, Bill Hicks. These are people that tell very offensive jokes. So I'm not criticizing the joke. But it is absurd that we live in a society, a first world society, where people being assaulted in the most grotesque way sexually in prison is so common that we joke about it. Like, that probably shouldn't be the case, even for horrible, heinous criminals. So that's an issue on the left that I think that I've shared with them. And there's other things. Like, there's certainly criticisms uniquely of people like Donald Trump on a litany of issues that I will share from the left. Like, I don't think Trump handled the Epstein stuff good at all. I have serious criticisms of that. So in general, there are people and ideas on the left that I could get behind. However, I think increasingly, maybe this is my bias, that the left is becoming more and more rabidly anti-Trump, which clouds the principles that they used to have. And so for me, it was a very sad moment when you see Charlie Kirk assassinated and you see so many people cheer it on social media, or you saw like this candidate for attorney general in Virginia, this Democrat who had said things in 2022 about wanting his opponent's children to die so that they would feel pain and vote the way he wanted. And no Democrat has revoked their endorsement of him. That sort of stuff makes it hard to say, yeah, I coexist with these people. We just have disagreements. Once it gets to the level of mocking people for their death or wishing it upon others, that's a non-starter for me. And that's,
sure.
Going back to making it a little lighter here, for me, debate, there's certain precursors that are necessary for a debate. Like, for example, we have to speak a language that we could both understand. If I'm in here speaking German and you're speaking French, this interview would be pretty boring because we'd both be like, huh, what? So there has to be an agreement. And with debate, you need other things. Like, you need to politely let the other person speak. You can't just filibuster and over talk them the whole time. But one of the most fundamental things that I think is necessary for a debate that people don't think about is you can't want to use physical violence with me if you disagree. At that point, words aren't possible. Like, I'm not going to sit in a room and say, I think you're wrong, and that person to be cracking their knuckles like, okay, then. Like, that's no longer a debate. Like, that's violence. And for me, it makes it incredibly difficult because once people justify, like, well, I think that you're, you're like those World War II Germans. How do you have a conversation with that? Because in the back of their head, it doesn't matter if they lie to you. It doesn't matter if they threaten you because you're amongst the most evil person that's ever lived. And it's like, hey, man, I just want less taxes and a secure border. I don't think that puts me in line with World War II Germany. So yeah, it's difficult. Certainly there are ideas that I respect and I can see where they come from. And I always try to put myself in other people's shoes, where they're coming from. There's certainly people I respect, but it becomes more and more difficult when events like that occur. So.
Sure. Well, I totally understand that. Now, I'm from Minnesota, so I got to ask you about this political figure, Jesse Ventura. What are your thoughts on Jesse Ventura?
The body, man.
Yeah, he was cool. I mean, he was in the late 90s for me, and I'm 38 years old, so I was into politics, and I didn't really know. I just thought it was really cool, professional wrestler, politics. And I hear some of his he's got a lot of conspiracy theories out there too, which I want to get into next. But I also wanted to ask you if you have any thoughts on Jesse Ventura.
Well, he has a little Trump derangement syndrome, but that's okay. I think he hates Vince McMahon, or at least at one point did, who was friends with Donald Trump. So I wonder how much of that colors it. First thing to say is these figures of the past. Donald Trump is one of these as well. A TV star that then became president. But I'm always amazed by the crossover success that some of these people have. Jesse Ventura, I put in a category with like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, if I'm not mistaken, Jesse was a Navy SEAL, right? Who then goes on to become a professional wrestler, who then goes on to become, not a household name actor, but certainly a competent actor in some big features, right? Who then goes on to become governor. I mean, very similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger, where it's like, Man, talk about a diverse set of skills, physically imposing skills to be able to build your body like that. And, in Ventura's case, literally to be in the military the way he was, plus then the toll that professional wrestling takes on you and how physically fit you have to be for that. And then also having the charisma, which I guess is a wrestling skill, to then go on and, that campaign that he won. I mean, it's right up there with Trump winning in 2016 as one of the most unlikely political victories of all time. He ran as an independent. When's the last time that an independent's won a large seat like governor like that?
I don't know ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened, but it's very rare. And, I dug a lot of his libertarian leaning ideas. Some of his conspiracy theories I agree with. Most I don't. Most I think are a bit crazy. So, but yeah, he's a very interesting figure. I think that he has suffered lately of some Trump derangement stuff, particularly when it comes to sort of January 6th and things like that, where he, I think, went way overboard with what that meant. But all in all, I think that he had a lot of policies that I found interesting, or a lot of positions I found interesting, and hopefully continues to live a long, successful life. But when he's gone, his legacy will be one of the most interesting people ever involved in politics. And I think that we're better off for having him there. So
I like it too. Now, there's one more question I have before we get out of the politics portion. Has anyone ever changed your mind after a debate? Maybe it's happened multiple times. Is there one, and if so, is there one that actually stuck out in your mind? Like, oh, okay, I can see how they came up with that. And you know what? I think I might agree with that.
Yeah, so I could think, so certainly in the game of policy debate, there were people that changed my mind, though oftentimes those issues were very nuanced. So for example, you might get topics like, should we update our Aegis missile defense on our nuclear carriers? And I might go in with a strong opinion and walk and be like, oh yeah, actually they make a good point. But as far as practical stuff that you could see like in real life, I think that a lot of people, particularly this guy who, full disclosure, I work for, his name's Andrew Wilson, who runs a channel called The Crucible. I think Andrew has convinced me on a lot of sort of more Christian ideals when it comes to sort of being more against all forms of abortion and, a lot of policies that you would have surrounding LGBT issues. I think that I used to be less harsh on those. I still have, when it comes to a legal sense, primarily a live and let live thing, but I do think that culturally, I think he has convinced me of the need to push back on more of that stuff. From the position on the left, I think that there are meta things that have occurred quite frequently that I'm willing to be like, oh yeah, on issues that I thought were very important. A couple examples, when it came to the George Floyd trial, Derek Chauvin, I did a big debate on it, and I approached this from the perspective of a juror. And one of the things that I found to be particularly troubling with the prosecution's case was it appeared as if there was an admission that Derek Chauvin had been trained to use the hold that he used against George Floyd. If so, as a jurist, I'd be like, I don't know that I could find him guilty of like second-degree murder if he was using a move that he was trained in. However, in the course of the debate, the person I was debating showed me that according to the law and the judge's instructions, they were told specifically that him being trained would not be exculpatory. And so I was like, oh, well, I guess as a jurist, if I'm trying to be a good jurist, that would change my perspective on that. There was also perspectives that I've had changed on sort of what I thought should be the case when it comes to policing, like, some things on policing that I was maybe formally stricter that I later became, less strict on when it came to policing and things of that nature. The left originally convinced me to be looser on drugs than I am now when it comes to a legal framework. So, yeah, there's certainly things like that have occurred. But a lot of times in the meta discussion, there's things that people I debate. One of the reasons it's important to debate is because it helps you get to the truth, at least as you see it more. And sometimes that means you're wrong, but it also helps sharpen what your opinions are. And I think one of my strong suits is I got good at debate because I was living in these two simultaneous worlds. So any opinion I ever had was pushed back upon. If I make some lefty opinion, and I'm with my redneck friends, they're going to be like, what? But if I make right-wing opinions and I'm with sort of these very intelligent people in the debate circuit, they're going to push back on each and every one of them. So many people in life have been in a bubble and they've never had anyone seriously challenge whether it be their political or cultural beliefs. And then what happens is when they finally get outside that bubble, maybe it's through work, that all of a sudden they're in a conference and there's people there from a different walk of life. Or maybe it's like these celebrities. You'll see all of a sudden someone shoves a microphone in their face and they sound like complete dolts. And that's because their whole life they've just had yes men around them saying, you're the best, you're really smart, your ideas are great. And then you hear them and they're like, oh, what are you talking about? And this isn't just politics, by the way. You can see it with sports. Like, did you ever hear a celebrity weigh in? Like, College Football Weekly or something will have a celebrity on and they'll start giving their opinion on who's going to win a game. And you're just like, what is this guy even saying? Like, it's because no one's been there to challenge their sort of beliefs. So you should seek out people that you like and that you trust that maybe don't exactly have the same perspective as you, because even if you don't want to change your perspective, it will help you sharpen your own. Because steel sharpens steel. And if you're just in a bubble, as soon as you debate someone competent with different ideas, they're going to make you look foolish. So.
I like that. Steel sharpens steel. I always love to hear other people's perspectives because everyone comes from different backgrounds. You come from a different background than I come from, and I come from a different one than my friends come from. So I like to listen to where they also come from. And that brings me to the next thing, which is conspiracies, because I think that you're kind of into conspiracies too.
Sure.
Some of my favorite ones that there's one, the 9/11, that's a big one. And Tucker Carlson was just coming out with some stuff lately, and I started watching him with my 4-month-old daughter. So she's going to be into this kind of documentary stuff because she likes to watch football documentaries with me and stuff. But also another one that always intrigues me is aliens. And I think a lot of people actually intrigues. Do you, what's a conspiracy theory that you really like or you get behind?
Well, 9/11 is an interesting one, right? There's two parts of the conspiracy on 9/11 that I think are worth discussing. The first is Tower 7.
Okay.
And for those that don't know, the two towers fell, but there was a third tower, 47-story building. Any other day of the year, it would have been the biggest story in the world at 47. And it wasn't hit by a plane. We're told that debris knocked it down. But the question surrounding it took years and years for the NIST NIST to release this study. And I'm no engineer, so it's difficult for me to parse through it. But basically, it was sort of this unique way that no other building had to do with the vibration of the impact, which caused like a near free fall collapse. It seems dubious, but I'll get to that. So there's that, and then there's the funding part, and I think that's certainly a conspiracy theory, but I think it's all but proven. Even the 9/11 Commission report, they started, we all know famously that we went into Afghanistan to get bin Laden because he was the ringleader, but who financed him? And it seemed that the money was coming from Saudi Arabia. Now, that's a problem because they're supposedly the United States allies. So what's going on here? And basically, the 9/11 Commission report's like, we're not too worried about it. That's unforgivable. How can that be? And it's almost like, well, we kind of know where the answer will be, so we don't want to look into it because once we know and the people know. And so the problem I always had with 9/11 was this. If you asked questions about it, they just wanted to bite your head off. And so for me, it's not a conspiracy. I just thought I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. And I remember like a couple years afterwards asking this question to people and just getting my head bit off, which was, I watched these old movies like Red Dawn, like during the Cold War, where the idea was that and you hear stories, my parents would tell me stories. When we were in school, we had like special nuclear bomb drills where you'd have to get under the desk. And, there was a fear that like our parents' generation would have had like in the 70s and 80s that at any moment Russia, the Soviet Union could invade, and it was a big deal. And so how in the world did we have two towers get hit and then still a plane, then we had a third plane land in Shanksville, Pennsylvania here, and then the most secure building in the world, at least top 3, ought to be the Pentagon. How did they get to it? How did we not get planes in the air? Because if this would have been the Cold War and instead of a passenger plane, that would have been a Soviet military vehicle with like a nuclear bomb, we're done. Is our government that incompetent that if a hostile foreign superpower attacked us, we would just be shit out of luck? And people were like, shut up! Don't you ask questions. You're un-American. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. I'm not even alleging a conspiracy. But what have we done to change this? Because next time it might not be dudes in a cave. Next time it might be a competent military. And then what are we going to do? And like, I always say with these conspiracies, it's the reaction that's the tell, right? The COVID was one of those. With COVID, it was like, I don't know. Are you sure lockdowns are a good idea? Shut up. Do you want grandma to die? And you're like, wait, what? I
remember that.
Where's your evidence that the lockdown's the way to go? And here in Pennsylvania, it got real crazy. I had a radio show at the time, and I was bringing on coroners in the first 2 months of the pandemic that were like, look, Governor Tom Wolf here in Pennsylvania says that there's now 193 Pennsylvania deaths of COVID. They said 13 of them were from my county, but I'm the coroner. I signed every death certificate. I haven't signed one with COVID. And so after we talked to a bunch of these coroners, they wrote an official letter to Governor Wolf, and they had to reduce 43% or something like that of the COVID deaths that they had. Oops, our bad, just a mistake. But everything around the pandemic was, if you had legitimate questions, you were told, oh, you piece of shit, you want grandma to die. And it's like, that's always a red flag to me. It's like, wait a minute. Like, you're clearly uninteresting. If it's an outlandish conspiracy, then just address it. And of course, there's some people that'll be unwilling to listen. That's fine. But what you don't do is just like, shut up, how dare you? Because as soon as you do that, then people can't, the hair on your neck stands up. You're like, wait, what? Like, what's that about? So those are like some of the ones that I look at. What? I guess I already talked about Waco. I guess that's a conspiracy theory that I believe that the government tried to cover up what they did there. So
COVID was one that I couldn't get behind. I scientifically, and I'm not a scientist by any means. People were like, well, you got to get this shot, and it just came out. And I'm like, gosh, I don't know about that. And luckily, I never had to take it because I wasn't forced to, and nor was my wife. So that was amazing. And to be honest with you, both of us got COVID. She was a little bit sicker than I. It was like a normal, she felt like a normal cold flu. And I had COVID. Funny thing, I go home, and I'm sitting there petting my dog. I'm like, hey, he doesn't stink today. What the hell's going on? I'm like, he doesn't smell like a dog.
He couldn't taste it.
And I'm like, oh, shit. I'm like, let me go spray some cologne. Spray some cologne there. Couldn't smell it. I go, crap. I probably got COVID. So I went and got tested. They said, yep, you got COVID. I never got sick. In fact, I went and ran our lake around here 3.5 miles every single day, came home, lifted weights at my house, and I felt better than I had ever had felt, which is really odd because everyone had different reactions. But that's the same thing that everyone has is some people can get the flu and they're not as sick as other people. Some people get strep throat. It is what it is. But that was one thing that's a big conspiracy for me was the whole COVID thing because I never truly believed it was as deadly as it was. Now, some people are going to get pissed off because they go, oh, well, my so-and-so died from COVID. However, they may have had another underlying condition underneath. But I always said, people, you got to eat healthy, drink your water, and a little bit of exercise really helps out your immune system. And everyone's like, oh, no, just go get a shot. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. I didn't have to. So that was one thing that COVID was one that, and people that know me close know I was like, nope, we're not doing that kind of stuff. I will risk it. I'll let my immune system take care of it.
Yes. And then you're absolutely right. The reaction never made sense anyways. The people that were telling us that this was the most deadly serious disease and we all had to stay indoors over and over were getting caught not being indoors. Now, say that some crazy disease like leprosy is running amok and the doctor's like, oh my goodness, stay indoors or you're going to get leprosy and your skin's going to fall off. I'll guarantee that doctor ain't going to the nightclub. That doctor's saying, no way, man. This disease scares the shit out of me. So the fact that the people that were telling us to take it the most seriously weren't, that was a big red flag. And then a lot of the proclamations that they were making were antithetical. For example, in many states, like in Nevada, they locked down churches, but casinos were left open. Liquor stores were left open. Schools got shut down, even though all evidence told us that kids were remarkably, and that's the truth of it. Like when people say, well, I knew someone that passed away. They're probably old. The average death from COVID in the United States was right around or slightly higher the age than the average life expectancy. That means that the average person that died of COVID was 77, right? And so from the perspective of, you're a 25-year-old that's going to work and sending your kid to school so you can go to work. And they're like, nope, your kid can't go to school. Nope, you can't go to work. And then you're like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to pay my electric bill? And they're like, well, because if you go, grandma might run into you and die. And then you're like, okay. Meanwhile, in my state of Pennsylvania, you know what they did to grandma? They put COVID patients in the nursing home with grandma. So you, the healthy 25-year-old, couldn't go out because you could theoretically, after work, bump into your grandma and then she could get COVID and die. So instead, you were locked down while they put a COVID patient in with your grandma and she got the disease and died. So the disease certainly was deadly and dangerous, but only for a unique set of population of people that had significant comorbidities or people that were very old. And you can't shut down an economy for those reasons. I could talk about this all night. I'll just suffice it to say this. You're willing to have any conversation when someone's infringing upon your rights that much. Is there a hypothetical case for when the government should lock people down because of a disease? Of course. If some dirty bomb gets launched and all of a sudden there's some horrible disease like Resident Evil style zombies running around, should they lock up Manhattan? Sure, to stop that from spreading. But that's not what the pandemic was. And when you tried to ask legitimate questions like, well, wait a minute, lockdown, how long? Why? What's the evidence this will work? What are some other measures that we could do? What will the pains of a lockdown be? How will that affect people's health? How will that affect our economy? Right? They were just like, shut up. You want grandma to die? Shut your mouth. And now they all want to pretend they never said it. They're like, what are you talking about? And I'll tell you, and again, I'm not trying to make this too political. Another issue that we see like that's like the trans issue, right? And you have a lot of people pretending that they were never like, I have no problem. What do you mean there's a competitive advantage for biological men in women's sports? Now, you might come to the conclusion that you think it's worth allowing those people there. I would disagree, but that's fine, right? But the idea that there was never evidence for a biological advantage is absurd. And now you see all these people like, no one ever said that. We didn't say that. No one ever justified this. Yes, you did. Just stand by it. And it's okay to be like, listen, I made a mistake. Or I stand by it. But what frustrates me is the people, to this day, I'll debate person after person. What lockdowns? I don't remember lockdowns. What vaccine mandate? I don't remember that. And you're just like, yeah, I lived through it. And of course, and then the last thing I'll say from a conspiracy theory angle, when you see that, I mean, that was 2020, end of 2020, 2021, 2022. We're in 2025. We're only 3 years removed from that, right? And to see people rewrite history from 3 years ago, it makes you wonder, do I really know what happened in 1840? Do I really know what happened in the medieval ages? How do I know? I wasn't there. Someone wrote that history too. And if they could rewrite history in 3 years in the current day and age when we have access to so much information, what could you do when, 80% of the population couldn't read or write? So
right, exactly.
It's definitely, if you're conspiratorial minded, it's ripe for questioning a lot of world events that we think we know.
And my favorite part is when we had to sit behind plexiglass at a grocery store, but then they could load my groceries into my bag, and it was all good. It was all good. So that was always my favorite part. It made no sense. Well, anyways, as we're starting to wind down here, because I want to respect your time, we're at 50 minutes. I want to talk just about you as a person one more time here, and I want to talk about what. For you, what is something you think people get wrong about you? Because obviously you're very well spoken. You're obviously very strong in what you believe. What do you think is something that people misunderstand about Rob, the person?
I guess I'll go with two things. The first is, it's kind of humorous. I think people think I'm smarter than I am. And I think it's because I understand sort of argument structure and I am a pretty good speaker. But I'm actually really dumb at a lot of things, like practical application things. So I have friends that barely graduated high school that could tear apart your engine and put it back together in a day. And I have trouble putting air in a tire. Like, I'm that dumb when it comes to a lot of sort of everyday common sense things. People assume that I'm very well read. I'm really not. It's criminal how little I read anymore. I used to read a lot, but I need to get better. Now that I'm a dad, I don't read near as I used to brag. It was like, yeah, I read like 90 books last year. Of course, they're all 4 pages in cardboard, but still, no one's counting pages. You're counting books, So
I'm doing that right now too.
So that's one of the things. The other thing that I think people get wrong about me is I get very animated and I'll get pretty upset and PO'd when I'm screaming about this, that, and the other on my show. But I'm actually one of the most easygoing, nice people that you'll ever meet. For me, this is almost my therapy. When I come on here on a nightly basis and I'm doing my regular show, this is sort of my therapy. It's me talking through things that are in my head that I'm frustrated about politics and culture that I see in the world. And then I sort of shut it off. I get downstairs and I hang out with my wife who I love, and I hang out with my son who I love, and that's it. And I try my best never to bring sort of this sort of stuff into my family life to the best of my ability. For years before I did this, even while I was streaming, for 14 years, I worked home healthcare with adults with disabilities, primarily with one gentleman. So he had autism. And it was, easy for me to not talk about politics in that environment because, people like that, they don't really pay attention to politics or have the understanding of it. And what I learned is that I actually don't want to be involved in politics at all. I don't want to run for Congress again. I'm much happier when I'm not talking about it, but it's always in the back of my head. And so, although it might seem like I'm this maniac person that just focuses on politics 24/7, what you see is what you get, and that's it. If you met me outside of this, you would be like, oh, Rob's pissed off because the Pittsburgh Pirates suck again, right? Like, of course, like as always. And yeah, so I think those are things that people get wrong. It's not that I'm some heartless person. Like I said, I worked for years and years in a field that pays very little because I absolutely loved working with people with disabilities. And, I think I'm pretty sympathetic and empathetic when it comes to ways like that. And I hope that I'm a good husband and a good father. But that's who I am at my core. The politics stuff is something that I do is almost a hobby and it's an interest. Now, don't take it wrong. I sincerely believe everything I say. But that's what it is to me at the end of the day. I want to leave this world in a better place for my family when I'm gone. And politics and culture is one way that I could do that. But it's not the only way. And it may be the least important way as opposed to being a good husband and a good father. So.
Well, it just sounds like, from what I understand, it just sounds like you're passionate. And you actually answer the next question was, are you planning on running for Congress again at all? And you said no.
Not until possibly once my son's grown up. But I live paycheck to paycheck my entire life. I'm doing a little better now that I'm a full-time streamer. But I made the bold decision that I was not going to accept any money in my first congressional run. So I maxed out about $8,000 worth of credit cards, which I finally paid off last year, some like 5 years after I ran. And it took a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort. And now being a father, I just don't have that time or energy. I keep pretty busy. I got a lot of projects going on with streaming. So, and the other thing is just between me and you, I don't really like the city all that much, and I certainly don't like DC. And so I feel like if I got there, I would despise it. But I think that that's the exact type of person that I want elected. From rural Pennsylvania, I want someone that's like, I can't wait to get home to all my friends that work on farms and are welders and stuff. Yeah. I'm uncomfortable around all these limousine riding, suit wearing people. But I think too often what we get is people we send to DC, they get comfortable with that lifestyle as opposed to what they were dealing with back home. So, yeah, I'm not gung-ho to run. I'll say that. I would much rather... here's another thing about me. I don't need to be the big man. Like, if you think of it as a feudal system, I don't need to be the king or the duke. I'm happy being the guy that the duke or the king could rely on. I don't have to be the biggest streamer in the world. I don't have to be the actual congressman. I'm happy to help the congressman or the big streamers from behind the scenes. Now, if I end up in one of those positions, so be it. But I don't think it's something that I'm like destined for necessarily.
Well, I got two more questions, and remember, one of them is your Mount Rushmore of wrestling. But my next one, before we get to that one, is in 10 years-ish from now, what impact do you want your work to have on people, what you're doing right now? What impact do you want to have on other people outside?
I hope that it illustrates sort of the problem with blind trust in institutions, and I hope that people realize that they as individuals have intelligence and have things to add, as opposed to just assuming that some official in some institution will take care of things. And I hope that the other thing is that people... The most important message I have for people is never get too doom and gloom, right? There are always things worth living for, no matter how bad some of these political situations seem, the things that matter the most in life are at the local level. It's your family. Be a good son, be a good husband, be a good father, be a good neighbor. And I think if you do those things, you're making a change in the world probably better than 99% of people that try to get involved in national politics. I think when I'm on my deathbed, that's what I'll remember. I'll have to answer to myself, my God, and my family. And the questions I'll be asking won't be things like, did I influence people on my stream to do good things politically? The question I'll be answering was I a good husband? Was I a good father? Was I good to my parents? Was I a good neighbor? Was I good in my community? So I hope that that's what people take the most from what I say.
That's awesome. That's one thing I got to say is I taught school for 10 years, and I always taught all my students, I said, it costs $0 to be a good human. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. So I love that you said that. And my last question, like I said, what's your Mount Rushmore of professional wrestlers? If you want me to go first, I certainly can.
Go ahead. You go first. I think I have an idea, though, but go ahead.
Okay. Mine would be Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold, The Rock, John Cena. And there's some other honorable mentions that I really love, like Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. But if I had to think of Hulk got it off the ground to what it is, then Stone Cold and The Rock really took it to another level. And you and me, we loved the Attitude Era. And then John Cena was able to carry it for the next 20 plus years. And he's on his last run, which is kind of sad, but he's on his last run and he really carried off that PG era. And I think hopefully Cody can keep it going with Roman Reigns or whoever, but I want to hear yours because this is the biggest debate we're going to have.
Mine is very similar. So I do agree Cena, even though I was sort of done watching, I probably stopped watching wrestling seriously in like 2004. So Cena's just at the beginning, but I do understand what he's represented. I would definitely put Stone Cold there. I would definitely put Hulk Hogan. Now I will not put The Rock, even though I preferred The Rock in real time over Stone Cold, but I have trouble putting two people from the exact same era. And I think that The Rock and Stone Cold overlap so much. So instead, I would go for my first love in wrestling, which was Ric Flair, I was always more of a fan of the heels. So I would put Hogan, Flair, Stone Cold, Cena would be my top four. Now, those aren't necessarily my favorite four, but as far as influence from different eras, that's what I would put. And then, of course, I'm cheating and not going back. If Jim Cornette was here, he'd be pissed because we're not going back prior to like the mid 80s and before then. But that's just my lifetime, the ones that I saw that were a big influence on me. So.
Oh, that's awesome. This so much fun to have that kind of debate for me because I don't know much about politics other than what I hear and stuff. But it is really awesome to hear a perspective from every different person. You're very strong on what you believe in as well. And I appreciate that too. And I think a lot of people can actually appreciate that. But before we end this interview, since we've been going an hour, I would love for you to plug where people can find you, because I know Normal America is a big thing in your life on YouTube. If you wouldn't mind plugging where people can find you and listen to you.
Sure. So the easiest way to find me is Normal America with Rob Noerr, spelled as you see right there, my last name, Noerr. That's on YouTube, but I'm also at Normal America on places like Rumble, Twitch, and Kick and X. So you can find me on it's Rob Noerr, I guess, on X. You can find me anywhere there, but YouTube would be the easiest place to find me. I'm usually streaming every weekday around noon Eastern time, and I do a call-in show for about 2.5 hours, and then 10 p.m. Eastern time, 5 days a week as well. I do a nighttime show. So that's the easiest places to find me. Other than that, you could also tune in to The Crucible on their Rumble channel. They have a show called The Extravaganza. It's in the Rumble Top 10. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and I'm oftentimes the co-host there. Probably 1 out of every 4 episodes I'm the co-host there as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to see your channel grow. I think it's going to do great, and if you ever want to have me back on, I would love to do it.
Well, and the one thing I want to say is I'll plug this in the show notes, but I hope someone that listens to us understands that there is middle ground, that you can have a debate with someone and you don't have to be an enemy with someone. You can come off and be friends, because you said, I have friends that we are disagreements, but we are still friends at the end of the day. And I hope other people agree with that too, because you know what? That's what makes America great, is because we can have different opinions. We can have different decisions, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, we can still be kind people to each other. And I really appreciate you coming on, Rob, tonight for an hour with me. And it's been a real pleasure to have you. You did a fantastic job. I don't know, you just nailed everything. I had so many more questions already lined up, but I'm like, Rob just took care of it, and you actually answered some as we went along. So it was awesome to have
Listen,
you.
once you're a year from now, when you're Joe Rogan big, I'll come back and we can do the second half of the questions. It'd be great.
The biggest thing I can say is I have in common with Joe Rogan is that David Landau, the comedian, was on my podcast before he was on Joe Rogan's podcast. So that's really cool.
That's right. You got to call up Joe and be like, hey, man, come on. You're taking my guest. You got to have me on the show. So.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Well, Rob, one more time, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day. And this has been another episode of Brews Cruise. For those who are listening, you can find me on YouTube or any streaming platform for a podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, and 5-star if you don't mind. This has been another episode of Brews Cruise. Cheers to Rob.
Thanks, man.